In this lesson, we're going to be reviewing some basic principles of chemistry and, very importantly, properties of water. A lot of this should be review for you, and some of this, of course, is coming from Chapter 2 in your book. Now, in order to fully understand biology, chemistry is a basic foundation. So we need to review chemistry now. First thing you should know is that all living things are made of the same basic elements. These are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And they're represented here. I sometimes call it schnapps, or some people call it champs. But these are the basic elements that make up all living things. So it's pretty limited exactly what is found in living things. All known elements, as you probably know, can be found on the periodic table of the elements, and all elements are composed of these tiny things called atoms, and inside atoms are three subatomic particles known as protons, which are positively charged, electrons, which are negatively charged, and neutrons, which are neutral, they have no charge. Protons and neutrons can be found in the center of the atom in an area called the nucleus, and electrons are found out here somewhere, and it's not exactly known where they are at any given moment. The atomic mass of all known elements, it consists of their protons and their neutrons added together, so they have mass that's, I guess, measurable. Electrons' mass are so small that we don't count them in the mass of the atom. And electrons are found in outer shells, or sometimes they're called clouds, or sometimes they're called orbitals, depending. But they're found outside the nucleus, and the number of electrons will determine the property of the element. So the number of electrons that an atom has something to do with how that atom is going to behave with other elements. Now I'm going to go kind of quickly through this. I'm going to assume you had it in chemistry. In all atoms, electrons are found not exactly just anywhere, but they fill these things called energy levels. They live in these shells, and they are, at each shell, there's a slightly different energy level. If the shell is unfilled, these atoms will prefer to bond with other atoms, okay? There's an octet rule in that for many of these shells, 8, an octet, is preferred. If the atom has fewer than 8, it will want to gain electrons, and it will become negatively charged, and we call that an ion, okay? Specifically, if it's gained electrons, we call it an anion. If the element instead has only 1 or 2, it would prefer to lose those electrons and go down to the next shell, which is full. These will tend to lose electrons, and because they lose electrons, they will be positively charged. A positively charged ion is called a cation. Okay? If you have anions and cations together, they will form an ionic bond, which is a weak bond, which is pretty easy to break apart. So in this example, sodium atoms have only 1 electron in this outer shell. They will tend to want to lose an electron and become a cation, or a sodium ion. Okay? Chlorine, on the other hand, would like to gain one. It's got 17 total, so it has 7 in the outer shell, and it would like to gain an electron, and so it does. When sodium and chlorine get together, they are attracted to one another because one's negative and one's positive, and it forms a compound we call sodium chloride, or salt. Now, ionic compounds are very important in biology, and later in the year we're going to talk more about some of the specific ions that are important to living cells, but just bear that in mind. Some elements, rather than losing or gaining electrons, they're sort of somewhere in between, and to solve their problem of the octet rule, they would like to share electrons. Okay, an example of this is carbon. Carbon has 4 valence electrons, or 4 electrons in its outer shell, its outer cloud. So it would like to actually share 4, and then it will have 8. So carbon typically does that. When atoms share electrons, we call that a covalent bond. This is a very strong bond holding elements together. Now sometimes elements will share more than 2 in a bond. If there are 2 shared, we call that a single covalent bond. If there are 4 shared electrons, we call that a double covalent bond. And if there are 6 shared electrons, we call that a triple bond. Now, the other thing you need to know is that sometimes the sharing is not equal. It's unequal sharing. And it depends on the elements involved. Sometimes elements, I like to say they hog the electrons. They have more of an attraction to the electrons. And it forms something called a polar covalent bond. In this case, there is a slight charge on one end of the molecule. So it's like having a charge within a charge difference within the molecule itself. Within the molecule itself. A very important polar covalent molecule is water. In water, the hydrogen atoms are just a single proton, really. They do not have much attractive force for the electron, and so the electrons spend a lot more time around the oxygen, which is a larger atom, than they do around the hydrogen, creating a polarity within the water molecule itself. One side is slightly positively charged, the other side is slightly negatively charged, so there's a separation of charge within the water molecule. Because of this, you have a slightly charged molecule, and the positive ends of one water molecule will be attracted to the negative end of another water molecule. And this causes water molecules to sort of stick together. We don't think of water as being sticky, but it really is. And this stickiness of water we call cohesion. Now, cohesion, or stickiness of water, this polarity of water, causes a whole lot of properties in water that are very important. First of all, because of this bonding, we call it hydrogen bonding between elements in water, water will resist a change of state, which moderates Earth's temperature. So it makes Earth the right temperature to live in. Also, because of this hydrogen bonding between water molecules, it resists changes in temperature. We call this high specific heat, or we might call it a high heat of vaporization. This helps keep body temperature constant, because even as we get warmer, the water in our body doesn't heat up fast. We also know that because of this polarity, that water is a universal solvent. It can dissolve most things, which is helpful in cells because of chemical reactions. Okay, we kind of already talked about the fact that water is cohesive. There's also this term adhesive. Adhesion is water sticking to other things. Cohesion is water sticking to itself. And this, again, is due to the hydrogen bonding, or the polarity of the molecule. This serves as a transport medium. So because of cohesion and adhesion, water can travel up from the roots of a plant all the way up to the leaves. This is extremely important for plants. And, you may not be the biggest fan of plants. You might be more interested in animals, but they are amazing. And they can do this because of the properties of water. Water also has a high surface tension because of hydrogen bonding, and surface tension allows for some organisms to actually walk on water. It's difficult to break surface tension, which means it hurts when you land in the water. Some of you may have experienced that. Also, due to this hydrogen bonding, this is extremely important. As water freezes, most liquids don't do this, but as water freezes, it actually becomes less dense and floats. Most liquids, when they freeze, they are more dense as a solid than they were as a liquid. But water, because of the hydrogen bonding, the water molecules can't get too close together because of the charges. So because of that, they make a lattice and they spread out, and they're actually less dense when they're frozen. And this means that ice will float on water. When that happens, of course, as the temperatures drop, you have, first of all, it's not freezing from the bottom up, and then once the top freezes over, it creates an insulating layer, and the water below never reaches freezing. and that means that life can continue to survive at the bottom of lakes and underneath Arctic ice and stuff like that. Now, the last little topic we need to talk about is pH, and it's my understanding that some of you maybe haven't learned a whole lot about pH, so I wanted to make sure I covered it. pH stands for the percent hydronium ions in solution, and you can see here that water will dissociate, when it's a big bunch of it, into this hydronium ion and a hydroxide ion. That's just what water does. Some substances, when dissolved into water, either liberate more hydronium or they liberate more hydroxide. If they liberate a lot of hydroxide, they're called a base or an alkali substance. If they liberate more of the hydronium ion, then they are considered an acid. The way pH works is the lower the number, the lower the pH number, the more acidic it is. That means it has more hydronium ions. That's a little confusing, I know, but we can talk about it in class. So these low numbers are strong acids. As you get closer to 7, you get to be a weaker acid. Right at 7, we call that neutral. Pure water is neutral. And then as you go to higher numbers, we create a base. It's a basic substance, the highest being the strongest base or strongest alkali. Now, this is extremely important in living systems because, as you can see here, like, for instance, the human body, normal pH has to be right around 7. If you go much below 7, we call that an acidosis situation, and below 6.8 it results in death. Same thing on the other end. You get too high, up to about 8.0, it results in death. So pH is absolutely crucial to living systems, and luckily most living systems have these things called pH buffers that help maintain homeostasis of pH. The way this works in, for instance, human blood, you have carbonic acid and bicarbonate, and these are both buffers. And depending on whether you have more of the hydronium ions, the positively charged ions, or more of the hydroxide ions, the reaction will go different directions. I know you guys know about reactions, but if there's more bicarbonate, if there's more hydronium ions, then you go toward the bicarbonate side. If you have more of the hydroxide ions, then you'll go back the other way. And so this kind of is an equilibrium state, going back and forth, keeping pH from changing too much. All right, that's all there is for this lesson. Please bring your questions to class and we'll discuss some of this.